My name is Madison Morgan. She used to call me a loser. Now her fiancé calls me ma'am. The invitation came wrapped in gold foil, addressed to Ms. M. Blake, the name they still used when they wanted to forget who I was. Black tie required. Minimum gift, $500. Samantha never misses a chance to make herself the main character, especially when it comes to weddings. But this time, I wasn't just a guest. I was the silent investor, the quiet architect behind her perfect evening, and her fiancé, the man she paraded around like a prize. He just walked into my boardroom for a meeting. Didn't even know I owned the company signing his paycheck. They say revenge is loud, but not always. Sometimes it walks in wearing Valentino and says nothing, because silence is the sharpest voice in the room. Before I show you what happened when my sister realized the woman she called a failure owned her wedding, tell me, have you ever been erased by your own family only to rise beyond their imagination? Drop your city in the comments. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because this story isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming power, without raising your voice. It glinted under the fluorescent lights, taunting me. The script font screamed overcompensation, while the RSVP card practically demanded a donation rather than a presence. I picked it up with 2 fingers as if it might stain. Of course, Samantha would make her wedding another performance, one I was never meant to enjoy. Or attend, for that matter. I let the envelope fall flat again, the paper whispering as it settled against the polished mahogany. It wasn't the first time Samantha tried to exclude me, but this time I had leverage she didn't know existed. Last week, I sat across from her at our parents' dinner table. Candlelight flickered over faux elegance, my mother's silverware clinking like clockwork. Samantha had looked directly at me, sipping her 3rd glass of imported Pinot Grigio before casually dropping it. You know, Maddie, if it makes you uncomfortable, you really don't have to come. As if she were offering mercy, not manipulation. My father didn't even glance up. My mother changed the subject. I didn't argue. I never do. Not with them. Instead, I watched. Took note. Samantha's fake diamond earrings. The slight tremor in my mother's hand. The way my father only asked about Aurora Capital to fish for gossip, not interest. I stored every detail like I always do. Quietly, methodically. Now back in my office, I turned from the invitation and opened my laptop. The Meridian Technologies acquisition proposal lit the screen. 10 months in the making. 9-figure valuation, and a name buried deep in the executive summary. James Whitaker, COO. I highlighted his name and tapped the screen, amused. So that's him, Samantha's fiancé. And soon, unknowingly, my employee. Madison. Michael's voice slid into the room before he did. You have a visitor, scheduled 10 minutes ago. I looked up. My assistant stood at the threshold, tablet in hand, immaculate as always. Who is it? James Whitaker. Said he's here to speak with the CEO. Didn't mention he was here on family business. I tilted my head. The coincidence would have been comical if it weren't so perfectly timed. Let him in, I said, voice steady. I think it's time I meet the man she thinks is out of my league. Michael gave a subtle nod and disappeared. I rose, smoothed the front of my coat dress, and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that swallowed the skyline. The city shimmered in early December's twilight. Sharp, cold, indifferent. I didn't need Samantha's approval. I never did. But she'd made a game of belittling me for years. My clothes, my choices, the fact that I hid behind a desk instead of chasing staged Instagram success. This time, though, the game had changed. I hadn't told anyone, not even Michael, that Aurora was finalizing a controlling interest in Meridian. That made James mine, professionally speaking. Footsteps padded softly across the marble floor behind me. I didn't turn. The glass reflected my silhouette. Tall, composed, unreadable. She called me a loser. Let's see how she reacts when she finds out who signs his paychecks. James walked into the glass-walled conference room like a man preparing for a job interview. He had no idea the job was already mine. He wore a navy suit that cost more than it should have. Crisp collar, confident stride, polished, pleasant, and entirely unoriginal. His smile was rehearsed, the kind designed to disarm, to charm, to sell. But I wasn't here to buy anything. Ms. Morgan, he said, extending his hand. It's an honor. I took it briefly, coolly. Mr. Whitaker, please have a seat. We were alone except for Michael, who stood by the wall near the tablet console, quiet and attentive. He knew not to intervene unless summoned. That was part of what made him invaluable. The boardroom offered an uninterrupted view of the Manhattan skyline, steel and sky colliding behind James's head like some silent, majestic warning. He looked around, visibly impressed, probably already imagining how he'd tell Samantha that he charmed the CEO. He didn't even realize she was sitting 3 feet in front of him. So, James began, leaning forward slightly. I wanted to personally thank you for the opportunity to collaborate on the Meridian transition. I've reviewed some of the proposals, and I believe there's strong synergy between our firms. He talked like someone who memorized phrases from a management workshop. I let him go on for a few more sentences, watching his composure stretch thin the longer I stayed silent. I finally asked, which segment of the portfolio do you think is most vulnerable during Q1? He blinked, then recovered. Well, I'd say segment C, though I've led several task forces recently to mitigate risk. In fact, some of the strategies being attributed to the department VP were originally my team's design. I tilted my head, eyes steady on his. Interesting, because I reviewed the same file. The metadata on those revisions point to someone else entirely. A flicker, just a flash in his eyes before he recalibrated. Credit goes around. We're a collaborative bunch. Sure, I replied, tone dry. Let's talk about wedding budgets. He laughed nervously. Now that's a different kind of merger, huh? Honestly, between the venue, Samantha's designer dress, and her taste for caviar, it's been a bit ambitious. I said nothing. Let the discomfort bubble. But she has style, he added, and very high expectations. Family's been interesting to navigate, especially her sister. Oh? He waved vaguely, like shooing off a mosquito. Madison? Complicated. Moody. Always distant. Samantha says she's kind of lost. I stared at him for a beat longer than was comfortable. And yet, she's funding the majority of your wedding. That startled him. He blinked. Excuse me? I smiled softly. Oh, you didn't know. Never mind. Let's stay focused. He hesitated, then straightened. So, will we be seeing you at the wedding? No, I replied, but I'll be attending the rehearsal dinner. He blinked again. I'm sorry. It's a family-only event. Exactly. I stood, ending the conversation. Thank you for stopping by, Mr. Whitaker. Michael will show you out. He hesitated as if there was more to say, but the meeting had ended the moment I decided it had. As James walked toward the elevator, visibly rattled, Michael returned to the room, tablet in hand. His voice was low but steady. Ms. Blake, the $100,000 donation to the wedding has been processed, credited to the Whitaker family as you requested. I didn't look away from the skyline. Let him enjoy that gift. It always costs more than you think. I walked into the St. Regis ballroom wearing a simple black Valentino. It cost more than Samantha's entire floral budget. The doorman blinked, hesitating for a beat before pulling the heavy gold-rimmed door open. Inside, the air smelled of peonies, money, and insecurity. The chandelier sparkled above a sea of sequined gowns and champagne flutes. White orchids lined the walls like expensive apologies. I moved with practiced ease, heels silent against marble, a phantom no one invited but everyone would remember. The wedding planner spotted me first. She was petite, flustered, head set askew, clipboard clutched like a shield. Sorry, may I help you? This is a private event. I gave her a soft smile. I'm aware. I don't see your name on the list. It wouldn't be, I replied, my tone velvet over steel. Try looking under anonymous donor. Her eyes darted toward the grand entrance. And that's when the true host arrived. Samantha, in white satin, jaw tight, posture like a blade. What are you doing here? She hissed, storming toward me. This isn't a pity dinner. Guests near the canapes turned discreetly. Their interest piqued. James stood by the bar, glass half raised, half frozen, eyes wide. I tilted my head and greeted him. Mr. Whitaker, how did yesterday's meeting go? He didn't respond, just swallowed hard. Samantha turned on him. Meeting? Before he could answer, I stepped in. We discussed a few restructuring ideas. You know, the kind of conversations that happen between CEOs and mid-level staff. More heads turned. Caitlin Monroe, the maid of honor, always hungry for drama, drifted closer. My mother, standing by the shrimp tower, froze mid-sip. My father had already started pretending I wasn't real. Excuse me, Samantha snapped. This is my night. Oh, I agree. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a slim black folder. Which is why I thought you'd appreciate transparency. You should know who paid for the crystal chandelier above your head. And the musicians. And the open bar. She grabbed the folder, ripping it open with a manicured hand. Her eyes scanned the payment details. Then stopped. Froze. Her mouth opened, then closed like a computer glitch. What is this? She whispered. Receipts, I said calmly. Itemized. Behind me, the ballroom doors opened again. Michael walked in, crisp in his dark suit, holding a leather portfolio. Ms. Morgan, he said, his voice carrying cleanly through the room. Your Meridian files, signed and confirmed. Samantha's eyes snapped up. Wait, Morgan? Your name's Blake. I met her stare without blinking. Legally, it's E.J. Morgan, easier in boardrooms. The silence was physical. You could feel it press against your skin. James had turned a pale shade of disbelief. Caitlin gasped loud enough for it to echo. A waiter bumped into a table. My mother looked like someone had poured vinegar into her champagne. Samantha tried to speak, but nothing came out. I leaned in just slightly, not enough to be threatening, just enough to punctuate. You called me a loser, Samantha. That loser owns this ballroom, your fiancé's company, and his promotion file. Shall we dance? She asked me once where I planned to sit, if I dared to show up. I suppose the head of the table will do. The snow had started to fall sometime after midnight. It was the kind of snowfall that softened even the sharpest corners, blanketed the city in reluctant quiet. I sat in the penthouse suite with my back to the window, coffee cooling untouched on the tray beside me. The chandelier above hummed faintly. Across the room, a single envelope sat unopened on the side table. An RSVP card I never mailed. 3 soft knocks. Michael looked up from his tablet. Want me to send her away? I didn't answer at first. Then I shook my head. Let her in. He nodded and slipped out quietly, leaving the door slightly ajar. Samantha stepped in like a woman walking through a landmine field. Her hair was pulled too tight, her lipstick flawless, but her eyes were swollen, either from crying or lack of sleep. Probably both. She stood in the entryway for a full 3 seconds, as if waiting for a cue that didn't come. Can we talk? She asked. I gestured to the chair across from mine. We're talking. She moved slowly, as though afraid I'd vanish if she blinked too hard. When she sat, she smoothed her dress across her knees and clasped her hands together. I didn't know, she said finally, voice small. About Meridian, or Aurora, or any of it. I know, I replied. I thought you worked in admin for some consulting firm or something. That's what I let you believe. She flinched. Why? I studied her for a moment. Because it was easier than forcing you to look past your own reflection. She stared at the carpet, then at her own hands. Her nails were chipped, unusual for her. "I don't understand why you gave so much," she said quietly. "The venue, the chandelier, the donation. You could have exposed me publicly, humiliated me." I tilted my head. "I didn't give anything. I invested in silence." Her face twisted. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," I said, not unkindly. "It's not about you feeling better. It's about truth. You never saw me because you never looked." She swallowed hard. "I'm trying now." "That's a start." There was a long pause, the kind only sisters can hold between them without breaking it. "You changed your name," she said finally. "I changed how I was seen." That night at Dad's fundraiser, when he told everyone I was the Blake who'd made it, and you just stood there. "Because I was tired of needing their approval to breathe," I said. "And because I knew I was already more than enough." She was silent for a beat. Then, "After everything, why make my wedding perfect?" I folded my hands on my lap. "Because that's the difference between us. You need everyone to see you win. I just need to know I did." She exhaled. It sounded like surrender, or maybe relief. A minute passed in silence. Snow thickened outside, clinging to the glass. Then she asked quietly, "Will you still come tomorrow?" I smiled faintly, eyes steady. "Of course. What kind of CEO skips her employee's wedding?" I walked into the ballroom not to make a statement, but silence made one for me. The string quartet paused mid-measure. Not from shock, just instinct. A tremor in the room as if its center had quietly shifted. Crystal flutes hovered in midair. Heads turned. Some subtle, some not. Conversations stuttered, then stalled entirely. The same people who once called me the weird sister now squinted as if trying to reconcile memory with reality. I wore the same black Valentino, not out of repetition, but declaration. Nothing else needed to change. The room had already done that for me. I moved with purpose, calm and slow, through a corridor of hushed whispers and reappraised eyes. The chairs were draped in ivory silk. Chandeliers shimmered like the first day of snow. Samantha had planned this wedding down to the scent of the candles. White tea and cedarwood. But she hadn't planned for this. Caitlin Monroe intercepted me halfway down the aisle. Her dress was peach, her nerves louder than her heels. "Madison." "Hi," she said, voice an octave too high. "You look stunning, really. Everyone's talking about, well, you. And I just wanted to say, if there's ever a chance to, my startup's been trying to pivot toward fintech, and I think one of your teams might be reviewing us." I gave her a small, genuine smile. "I think our teams have been in talks. Monday, you'll hear from legal." Her mouth opened slightly, then shut. She stepped aside like a curtain being drawn. At the far end of the ballroom, the Blake table sat like a private island, elevated, clothed in prestige. Samantha and James were surrounded by glasses and polished cutlery, their laughter slightly too sharp. My father looked older than he had 2 days ago. My mother fiddled with a napkin like it might reveal an escape route. I approached slowly, and they saw me. It was my mother who rose first, straightening her jacket. The pearl clasp at her collar trembled slightly. "We never knew," she said. My father stood beside her. "Why didn't you tell us?" I held their gaze unwavering. "Because you never asked. You preferred Samantha's story. It was easier to applaud." They both stiffened, but neither denied it. Around us, guests pretended to be absorbed in their menus or the floral centerpieces, but their ears were sharp. The power shift didn't need an announcement. It was vibrating through the stemware. James didn't speak. He avoided my eyes entirely. Whether it was shame or strategy, I didn't care. Then Samantha stood, glass in hand, face tight with something between performance and panic. "Let's raise a glass," she said, voice bright. "To family, to love, and to my sister." And to the woman who owns this room, apparently. The laughter that followed was polite, well practiced, but beneath it I could feel something deeper. Discomfort, clarity, the crumbling of an old narrative. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't need to. The room had already toasted me with its silence. Samantha once said I didn't belong in her world. Turns out she didn't really belong in mine either, but we could build something new. The rooftop terrace shimmered under the Manhattan skyline, a quiet canopy of glass and steel. Below, the ballroom still pulsed faintly with laughter and music. But up here, the air was gentler, cooler, honest. I leaned against the railing, the wind teasing a strand of hair across my cheek. The city stretched endlessly before me, alive, relentless, indifferent. I had learned to love it that way. Footsteps, soft, hesitant. I didn't turn until I heard the door click shut. Samantha stood there, no longer in the silk and sequin armor of the ceremony. She had changed into a simple navy dress. Her hair was down. Her heels were gone. "You found the quietest place at your own wedding," I said, voice calm. She gave a tired smile. Turns out I needed it more than the dance floor. There was a pause. She stepped closer, arms crossed, not in defense, just trying to hold something together. "I never thought I'd be jealous of silence," she said quietly. "But when you walk into a room and say nothing, it's like gravity shifts." I let the wind carry that truth for a moment. "I wasn't trying to steal anything from you," I said. "Not the spotlight, not the ceremony, just the space to exist as I am." She nodded, looking out over the city. "You always were good at existing in spaces no one expected you to fill." I glanced at her. "And you were good at filling spaces no one questioned." She winced but didn't argue. "When we were in college," she began, hesitating. "That paper you wrote? The one I turned in under my name?" I remember. "I waited for you to say something. You didn't." "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," I said. "You needed the credit more than I needed the praise." She let out a hollow laugh. I thought it made me clever, but now... She trailed off. I didn't press. "I built something," I said finally. "Not to prove anything. Not even to you. Just because I could. Because I needed to know I was capable of more than being invisible." She looked at me then. Really looked. "And you are." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I built decoration," she admitted. "A wedding. A persona. A checklist of applause." I watched her for a long moment. Then I stepped away from the railing and faced her fully. "You once said I wasn't worthy of being called your sister," I said evenly. "Now ask yourself, are you ready to be mine?" She blinked, taken aback. And then something shifted in her face. Not shame, not regret, but understanding. Something deeper. "Maybe this time," she whispered, "I'll learn who you really are. Not the CEO, just Madison." I smiled softly without armor. "Good," I said. "That's the one who built the empire." The night was winding down, but I didn't feel tired. Not in the way people usually mean when they say that. My body ached from the heels, my cheeks were sore from all the polite smiling. But inside, something else had uncoiled. Not exhaustion. Release. The city blinked below me, indifferent and alive. I had once looked up at these same towers from a too-small apartment window, wondering what it would take to be seen. Not by the world, but by the people who claimed to know me best. And tonight, somehow, I wasn't asking that question anymore. Samantha's words still echoed faintly in my ears. "Maybe this time I'll learn who you really are." Not the CEO, not the headline. Just Madison. And for the first time in years, I wasn't hiding behind anything. No strategic mergers, no calculated silences, no business pseudonym designed to be palatable in boardrooms. I was simply present. Entirely. Authentically. There was a strange kind of justice in that. Not the dramatic kind that makes headlines or slams courtroom gavels, but the quiet kind. The kind you feel in your lungs when the air doesn't choke anymore. I thought back to that invitation, how it had landed on my desk like a dare, gold-foiled and cold. I thought of Samantha's voice at dinner, telling me not to come if I couldn't afford the optics. I remembered standing in the hallway of my parents' house while they looked past me like a shadow on the wall. I remembered being 13 and seated next to the kitchen doors so the important guests could sit closer to the cake. It would have been easy to use this wedding as a weapon, to expose every lie in front of every guest, to crush Samantha's carefully curated image like glass beneath a stiletto. But that was never the goal. I didn't want her to lose everything. I just needed her to see what she had tried so hard not to. Me. People think revenge is loud, that it arrives in fury and fire. But sometimes the most devastating form of retribution is dignity. That ballroom didn't erupt in chaos. No one screamed. No glasses shattered. But eyes shifted, perspectives fractured. Every polished conversation grew laced with uncertainty. And that was enough. James never spoke to me again. Not after the files, the dinner, the quiet unraveling of his little performance. But I wasn't waiting on his voice anyway. My parents tried, awkwardly, to bridge the years of silence in one clumsy sentence. We never knew. No, they didn't. But they could have. That's what stung. Still, I didn't walk away bitter. I walked away clear. There is a kind of power in holding the truth so gently, no one realizes it's been cutting them the entire time. In the end, it wasn't revenge that reshaped the story. It was revelation. Years of quiet cruelty, once ignored and dismissed, collapsed the moment truth stepped into the room with nothing left to prove. Justice, though delayed, always arrives wearing its own kind of grace. And sometimes the sharpest response to betrayal is never needing to raise your voice. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you're still watching, chances are you've been there. The ignored one. The misnamed one. The sister no one checked on unless they needed something signed, something solved, or something silenced. Maybe you've sat at a dinner table where your accomplishments disappeared beneath someone else's performance. Maybe your name was left off the invitation, but your money wasn't. Maybe you've been called a bit much, too quiet, or not the kind who wins. And maybe, like Madison, you learned something powerful. That justice doesn't always look like a confrontation. Sometimes it looks like clarity, like silence that cuts deeper than applause, like walking into a ballroom you paid for, without needing a spotlight. Because the room already knew, Madison didn't expose her sister to destroy her. She didn't crash a wedding for drama, she simply showed up. With truth, with receipts, with nothing left to prove. We share stories like this for a reason, not to glorify revenge, but to reclaim the narrative. Because for every person who is underestimated, dismissed, or erased, there's someone quietly building, watching, waiting, until one day they don't have to ask for a seat. They own the table. So if this story resonated with you, drop your city in the comments. Tell us the moment you stopped explaining yourself, the moment you let silence speak louder than defense. We're listening. And more than that, we believe you. This channel exists for the overlooked, for the ones who were told they'd never amount to anything, only to become everything, quietly. So if you felt seen, like, subscribe. Share it with someone who's rebuilding after being written off, because stories like this, they don't just end in a ballroom. They begin with one person remembering who they are. Thank you, truly, for being here, for seeing her, for seeing you. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay strong. Stay silent. Until silence becomes your power. And when they ask who you are, smile. And let the room answer for you. My name is Sarah Carter, and my inheritance was a joke without a punchline. My brother got the estate, manicured, modern, packed with assets. I got a crumbling farmhouse in Montana I hadn't seen since I was 7. That was how they said goodbye. Not with a hug, not with a memory, but with coordinates and silence. I arrived late to the reading. The lawyer's office was beige and bloodless, like grief had been sanitized for efficiency. My mother didn't even glance at me. Jake buried his gaze in his phone. And Ryan, my golden boy brother, sat smug, like he already knew how the story would end. They weren't wrong. I wasn't written out. Just written aside. Cascade County, the lawyer said. The words fell like ash. And just like that, I was dismissed with a whisper, and a property no one had visited